This talk is really going to be two talks, essentially. The title is Professionalization of Clinical Ethics Consultation. And the first half of the talk is going to be on professions and professionalization, the process. And after I lay that as a foundation, I want to apply some of the things I've said to the specific social role of the clinical ethics consultant. That is to say, somebody who works in the clinical setting on providing advice on ethically problematic active cases. So we're not talking about people that come in and serve on an ethics committee doing postmortems. Okay? We're really talking about people who are doing on-the-floor case consultation. So that's the way in which the field will be defined. I thought it would be interesting to begin with where this whole area of study began for me. It's 1972. I've been teaching philosophy of law, okay? And I'm in Chicago. I'm actually, the woman I'm married to at the time is a law student, and she's taking a course in professional responsibility in law. Now, I've been teaching ethics for quite some time, and it was a bit puzzling to me that lawyers took a special course in ethics, and that the ethics of lawyers, I had a look at the Code of Ethics for Lawyers, and it was clear to me at the very outset that the norms that lawyers were subject to were not exactly the same as the norms that other people were subject to. Okay? And from the point of view of somebody who teaches traditional ethics, that was extremely puzzling. How could that be? There were two plausible explanations, both of which didn't work out very well. Okay? The first is that we have here a case of relativism. Okay? And so lawyers in this sense are like Samoans. Okay? If you're a Samoan, you have certain beliefs about what human beings owe to each other, and they're not the same as the ones that everybody else has. There are lots of Samoans living in Honolulu, okay? And they are very problematic in the healthcare setting because their social norms are really quite different. But to say I'm a Samoan is not to justify what you believe or the judgment you make. It's only to explain it, okay? And it's still out there. And so while if lawyers were like Samoans, some kind of tribe with its own conventions and norms, okay, then they were lacking in any kind of justification, okay, for what they did. So there had to be some kind of justification. On the other hand, if you could give a justification for special norms that apply to lawyers, even though they were at odds with others, okay, then it looked like it might be ethical overreaching. Okay? If there were a genuine departure from the common morality, then who's to say that lawyers as a group were not just really unethical people? Okay? They were people who just didn't do, okay, what upstanding, righteous people did. And if you took that really seriously, it would be a moral infraction, okay, for any human being to become a lawyer. Okay? It would place yourself in ethical peril. Okay? Now, I know a lot of people believe that. Okay? But this turned out to be the very beginning, okay, of a fairly substantial enterprise, an intellectual adventure for me. And along the way, I wrote a book on legal ethics, okay, published by Prentice Hall, okay, in which I basically tried to provide a justification. Okay, it's kind of like morally okay to be a lawyer. Okay. Now, most people that write on legal ethics don't have that approach, okay? But I did. It was actually a part of an effort to understand my wife at the time. So there's a personal aspect to all this. Okay? But shortly afterwards, I was involved in a 4-year-long project to develop a code of ethics, actually, for preschool teachers, for the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And most recently, okay, I've been doing preliminary work in the context of ASBH on the possible development of a code of ethics for clinical bioethicists. And so all of this is stuff that I've basically taken with me, and I'll comment on these issues as we move along. Okay? So if we're starting to think about, if professionalism is the topic, there are a couple of distinctions that need to be made. Sometimes we talk about somebody doing a really professional job cleaning that oven. Okay, that's not the conception of professional that I have in mind. Okay, what we mean is somebody's doing a thorough job, discerning, okay, attentive in all the ways we expect people to do estimable work. That's not the conception of professional that I have in mind. Other times we distinguish between professional ball players and amateur ball players, okay? And that's also not the distinction that I have in mind. Okay? What I have in mind when I talk about professions is standing in a professional, let's say, is standing in relationship to something we can call a profession. Okay? So it's not possible to be a professional in this sense unless somewhere or other there's actually a profession out there. Okay? And a profession is a particular form of social organization. I actually had occasion to read through a lot of the sociological and historical literature, okay, on professionalization. When I talk about professionalization, again, there can be two things that you're thinking about. Normally, professionalization is a process that occurs to a particular individual as they go through a professional school. Okay? So undergraduate education is more about learning stuff. Okay? But professional education, on this view, results in an alteration of your identity. Okay? You think of yourself differently when you emerge from professional education. Okay? For doctors, it's particularly dramatic. They actually change their signature. Okay? Okay, from Dave Dukas to David Dukas, MD. Okay? And that the MD kind of gets attached to your social identity. Okay? And how can I put it? When I work in hospitals, they always want to put PhD after my name, even though okay, I don't feel that way myself. Okay? Okay? But so the alteration in professional identity is really absolutely critical. Okay, here you take on a new social role. So what is a profession? There are a few things I think we can say about it at the outset that aren't all that informative. Okay, one is okay, here's some examples. Okay, of the two best known examples are lawyers and doctors. Okay, sometimes people put in the ministry or the priesthood as another example. I think as we move along, maybe in the questions I'll kind of indicate why I think that's not really a good move. Okay, there are other possible examples. Nurses and engineers are interesting. They're both inexpensive professional roles. You can enter the profession as a nurse or an engineer after a BA degree. Okay, for both doctors and lawyers, there's a graduate degree that you have to go through. Are nurses at the same level as doctors in terms of their professional status? Okay, well, we can have an argument about that, and if you want to, I'll explain what the argument looks like. Engineers, okay, and what about professors? That's an issue. Now, many professors don't think of themselves as professionals at all, okay, but some of us do. And do we meet the standard of a profession? Well, it's an open question. I'll be happy to talk about it later on. Okay, librarians. Okay, and preschool teachers. Okay? So we developed a code of ethics for that particular group. So they actually have a pretty good code of ethics. But what about librarians? Are they going to be professionals? Then moving away, police officers. And how about journalists? Okay? Journalists, to their great credit, are about the only professionals these days that regularly march off to jail rather than violate their professional codes. Okay? And that to me is like really quite remarkable. And yet, if you talk to journalists, they usually don't like to think of themselves as professionals. We're regular guys, okay? And we drink beer, okay? You know, just like anybody else. Okay? And then finally, for clear examples of non-professionals, I've got Marines, maybe. Maybe we want to count Marines as being sort of professionals, professional soldiers. But there are no amateur soldiers. Okay? But what about day laborers? Day laborers clearly don't qualify as professionals at all. Okay? And so what you're driven to, okay, is something like this. Okay? And I put this on the board in order to kind of help you clarify your intuitions here. Okay? So here is a professionalization as a spectrum. Okay? I think most of us would put day laborers at the far left. Okay? And most of us would put doctors and lawyers at the far right. We might disagree about where we put nurses. Okay? Some people want to put nurses right up there with doctors and lawyers. Others would want to ratchet them back maybe to about a 7 or so. Okay? Professors don't do very well, generally speaking. Okay? Maybe at around 5. Okay? And people are often confused about Marines and police officers. Okay? But you can get, okay, an interesting, intuitive spectrum, and there's quite a bit of agreement in this. And where there isn't agreement, okay, you can usually explain what people are thinking, why they might choose some rather than some other evaluation. Okay. So I want to begin with this and give you the idea that professionalization is not a precise single category, but rather professionalization offers you a range of options along the way. Yeah?
Couldn't you apply that not also within a profession? You're stating out different.
Yeah.
What about within the same profession?
Well, I actually never thought about that. Okay, so something maybe to think about. But maybe we can chat about that later on. Okay, but I don't know what the answer to that is. Okay, so what is a profession? Okay, the usual stuff that you think about right away is that we're talking about an occupational category. When we talk about a profession, we're talking about a livelihood. Okay, and as I indicated before, there's characteristically a social identity. Okay, so if I ask what are you, people will come up with some social identity, and the social identity that many professionals actually appeal to is the role that they occupy as a member of a particular profession. Okay. So there's a nice strategy in philosophy. If you can't answer the question, change the question. Okay? Okay. And if you can't think about what a profession is, okay, one thing you might do is to alter it. Okay? If an occupational category is not a profession, okay, what would it have to do in order to become a profession? Okay, so here is a second notion of professionalization. First notion of professionalization is what happens to an individual, a single individual, when he or she goes to a professional school. Okay, they come in. Okay, you can really see this. I was at the University of Chicago for a year, trying to learn as much as I could about law. Okay, and the students would come in the first year wearing, I don't know, flannel shirts. Okay, and corduroys. Okay, and at the end of the third year, they're wearing three-piece suits. Okay, they come in smoking dope and they leave drinking sherry. Okay. So it's a really quite remarkable, okay, alteration in character that occurs, okay, over the 3-year period. Okay, so if an occupation, what would it have to do in order to become one? So I'm going to switch now to this problem of professionalization on the institutional scale. Okay, so I'm not really talking about a single individual. Okay. Oh yeah. Now this is of course pertinent to clinical ethics consultation, because if we're talking about the professionalization of the field of clinical ethics consultation, it seems to me this is the intellectual equipment that we're going to have under our belt. Something about professionalization. I might just add that as I went through the historical and sociological literature on professionalization, of which there's quite a bit, okay, I was going through it as an ethicist. Okay, that is, I was looking for an answer to the question, what would account for the special obligations, if such there be, okay, that professionals take themselves to have? Okay, how is it possible for there to be this kind of acquired morality? So, and a morality that in fact differs in important ways from ordinary morality. There are things that lawyers do that the rest of us, I think, if we were moral people, might really hesitate before doing. Okay, arguing to a jury to form the judgment that your client did not commit some serious crime when in fact you're quite aware that he did. Okay, and that's something that lawyers do routinely. Okay, or confidentiality is another one. Okay, there are occasions when lawyers are in possession of information that is of vital importance to somebody else under ordinary circumstances. Okay, you would want to convey, you would feel obligated to convey that information to others needing to know, and yet lawyers will not do that. Okay, so there's a discrepancy between ordinary morality and professional ethics, and how are we to make sense of that? So as I was going through all of this stuff, what I'm going to be aiming at is a justification, okay, for special norms for professionals. Okay, so here's how to professionalize your occupation in 3 steps. Now notice it doesn't say 3 easy steps. In fact, they're not easy. Okay, first, step 1. Okay. You have to make a claim to maximal competence. Okay? So this basically says, look, world, okay, we are simply better at carrying out certain kinds of tasks than any other group. That's what I call the claim to maximal competence. This is, by the way, a real where the distinction between doctors and nurses becomes really interesting, because many nurses see themselves as mastering a base of knowledge and skill that's quite different from medicine. Okay. Others see nurses as simply having mastered a subset, a little bit of what doctors are supposed to know. Okay. And so if it's the latter, then nurses can't make the claim to maximal competence. But if it's the former, the knowledge base is really discrete, then they can. Okay, so a whole lot really turns on what the competence is that you're really talking about. Okay, we are better. Now, in order to make the claim to maximal competence, you have to satisfy two preconditions. The first one is you have to have an organization capable of standing up and saying, we. Okay? Now, the American Medical Association appears in about 1848. The first real bar association, New York State Bar Association, appears around 1870. Okay? So there's got to be some organization that is representative enough to be able to claim to speak on behalf of all of those favored practitioners, the ones that measure up in terms of competence. And this is going to be what I describe as an embryonic professional association. It's not a professional association yet because there isn't a profession, but it is going to be potentially capable of evolving into something like a professional association, like the ABA, American Bar Association, or the American Medical Association, or the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or something like that. Be okay? By the way, there's a wonderful book called The Culture of Professionalism, which describes the way these organizations swept through American society, starting around 1848 and continuing to about maybe 1930 or 1920. And so all of the disciplinary associations, like the American Philosophical Association, they all appeared during the barbers, the morticians. Everybody had a professional association. And now there were antecedents, like, for example, guilds. Or the clergy in some churches, but they're not the same as these professional associations. This is a fairly modern form of social organization. So the second thing we need, and this is critically important, is a criterion for inclusion. Who gets to be designated as a favored practitioner, maximally competent? How do we distinguish between the charlatan, the quack, and the doctor, the MD? And so you need some kind of criterion for, to operate your gatekeeping function. And in the mature cases, what happens is you have certification procedures. So individuals, jump through various hoops and they get their MD. But in addition to that, you need accreditation procedures, assessing educational institutions that give them the privilege of actually designating somebody who has actually completed the course of study. And on top of that, you may want exams. Examinations as well. And so in the clearest cases, this is in fact what you get: certification and accreditation procedures. Yes.
So how far down? I would probably say only into the second box of number one. Did the Society of Bioethics consultation get? Because they really, they partially did gatekeeping, because as we were talking about before, they actually did that nomination thing.
Yeah.
But they were saying they were a we. Yeah. We are ethics consultants.
Okay.
And that's as far as it went.
Let me hold off on that, because I'm going to be applying all this intellectual equipment, to the special case of clinical ethics consultation, the second half of my talk, here's the second one, a commitment to significant social values, That is what the Embryonic Professional Association has to say on behalf of its membership, who are going to be people that have somehow cleared the hoops, is that we're not just in it for the money. We're not, selling appendectomies to the highest bidder. We're going to have some kind of independent commitment to the well-being of society as a whole. And we've got to be somewhat clear about what that is, what the dimensions of that commitment are. It's a commitment to community service in a way. And indeed, professional associations are characteristically creatures of either state governments or national governments. And so there's this interesting relationship between the professional association and the community it serves, again, in the mature cases. We collectively undertake to accord due attention to certain salient social concerns. And the social concerns that you're going to attend to, you're going to commit yourself to providing due attention to, are the ones that fit into whatever competencies you claim to have. So lawyers activities, the knowledge, and the skills that they claim competence in are going to have something to do with the achievement of justice within the judicial systems. Doctors, or however you define it, they've got to be committed to the health of the community. I spent a year, my last sabbatical actually was at the American Medical Association. And I was working in the building on State Street, and as you walk up to the building, emblazoned on the glass panes right at the sidewalk level is the expression, "Physicians dedicated to the health of Americans." Right there. It's a good example of the kind of commitment. Of course, there's a lot more. There's the codes, the different subspecialties have. So this commitment, these commitments, whatever they are, characteristically get articulated in a code. So those are basically the first two steps. Three, and this is really built on the first two, and this is exclusive reliance by the society on the profession as the means by which certain critical areas are going to be taken care of, by which the competencies are made available. Now, you can kind of see that if I accept the claim to maximal competence, nobody is better able to do these things than doctors or lawyers or whatever. And secondly, that those in the profession are reliably committed to significant social values that we care about, then there won't be the ability or the necessity to rely upon anybody else. What you want to do as a society is to delegate to the profession exclusive custody, in a sense, of the skills and the knowledges that can be brought to bear on the problems that you're eager to see are properly attended to. And in fact, in the clearest cases, both medicine and law, it is a criminal offense to practice law without a license and to practice medicine without a license. So the monopoly that the profession collectively enjoys is a genuine monopoly. And so individuals who haven't gotten through the gatekeeping process are really not permitted legally, it's a legal matter, to do what doctors do routinely. Are you okay about this? There's some interesting, lawyers once sued a jailhouse lawyer for practicing law without a license. He was in jail already, and no other lawyers would provide legal services to people in the prison. But he did. I thought that took chutzpah, I think, to actually do that. So it extends really amazingly far. Okay, so there are the three. Claim to maximal competence, commitment to significant social values, characteristically expressed in terms of some kind of code. And then three, exclusive reliance, social reliance upon the profession as the means by which certain goods are going to be realized in the context of society. Okay, now here, to identify as a professional is to be granted some public trust. This is where I'm going to have to read it. To become a steward of certain knowledges and skills. They don't so much belong to me as they rest in my possession on behalf of the rest of society. Now, social reliance, the society as a whole, relying upon the organized profession, plus profession, and one professes one's competence, and one professes one's dedication to those social ideals. Together create responsibility, monopoly. And there's a nice concept in law called promissory estoppel. Suppose I promise Dr. Dukas a pony. I'm going to get you a pony for your birthday. Now,
only 2 weeks.
So this is a under law. Do I have to give Dr. Dukas a pony on his birthday? And the answer is no, I don't. It's what's called the gratuitous promise. I mean, had he mowed my lawn, and I promised him a pony. If he mowed my lawn, then I would owe him, because there were a bit of consideration. But here, I don't owe him a pony. Now, there's something that Dr. Dukas can do in order to bring it about that I actually have an obligation to buy him a pony. What he can say is, hey, Ken, because you promised me the pony, I'm going to rent stall space for a year and a half. I'm going to buy, saddles and stirrups and all the things you need when you have a pony. Okay, I'm going to buy horse feed or whatever it is that horses eat. Okay, for a whole year. Okay, and so what I'm doing is I'm relying to my detriment, okay, on your promise, okay, to provide me with the pony. And if he does that, okay, I'm going to owe him the pony. Everybody clear about that? And that's in fact what is going on.
You owe me the pony.
I'll owe you the pony. I didn't say that.
You turned it around.
Oh.
No, I owed you a pony.
Oh, you gotta watch. You gotta watch me all the time. Okay. And so what you have here, okay, is not just a philosopher's social contract. You have a genuine social contract, the terms of which are actually hammered out in meetings between the legislative committees, okay, and members of professional associations. Okay, and the code of ethics winds up being a term of that contract. And because society is essentially barring anybody else from doing this stuff, okay, and the profession is committed to doing this stuff, okay, with certain attention to social values, okay, I would argue that collectively the profession has an obligation, okay, to deliver on the promises it makes, on what it has undertaken in the political process of professionalization. Okay, so in professionalizing, society delegates to the profession, and the profession appropriates a collective responsibility to use its distinctive knowledges and skills with due regard to the interests of the society that it exists to serve. Okay? And here's the answer to the puzzle. Okay? Sound principles of professional ethics, okay, are rules, principles, which, if generally adhered to, will guarantee that distinctive public interests will receive due care and attention. Okay, so for those of you who are philosophers, okay, at this level, we're really looking at a utilitarian, consequentialist justification. If you have this institution in place, okay, then these goods are going to receive the care and attention that we want them to receive. Okay, but once you're in this institution, it becomes deontological, because I've stepped into the role of doctor, and when I step into the role of doctor, I'm subject to a bunch of rules, okay, that are necessary in order for the collective organization to discharge its responsibilities to the rest of society. Everybody clear about that? Okay. So it involves both consequentialist and deontological elements. Okay. The special obligations of professionals, I like this word, precipitate out of the collective social responsibilities taken on by these occupations as they complete the process of professionalization. Yeah.
Yeah, but just going, harking back to Rawls.
Yeah.
Rawls says that even so, we can't take for granted that the principles that we have agreed upon in the institution are going to be the right ones.
Absolutely.
We have to continually submit them to a higher court.
Everything is in play. Absolutely everything is in play.
It's not deontological in the sense that it can't be questioned once we have
that's right.
signed on.
That's correct. In fact, I mean, the argument we're going to have, okay, are the two kinds of arguments. We can argue that there are other values which we want to expect from doctors, or we can accept that the values are there, but disagree as to what rules collectively will result in the realization of those values. I wrote a paper recently on confidentiality and the exceptions to confidentiality, and it's real clear what the exceptions are currently. But I argue in that paper that even though we want to protect endangered third parties, the best way of protecting them, it turns out, is not to obey these rules, but to obey these other ones. Okay, so it's all in play, and when a society is healthy, okay, then members, the people who are outside the profession, are going to be arguing with people inside the profession, and people inside the profession are going to be arguing with each other, okay, about what the core professional values are and ought to be, and what rules will best result in the profession's discharging its responsibility. You okay about that? Okay. I wonder if we're through here. I think we may be through with part one. Oh, yeah, we are. Okay. So here's, and I want to kind of shift gears. I've talked about what professions are. I've talked about what the process of professionalization is all about. And I've talked specifically about how professionalization implicates the obligations that individual professionals have. Okay. This is kind of like what's been, taking up my attention for ever since 1972, okay, when I first discovered this problem. Okay, so what are clinical ethics consultants? Okay, they work in clinical settings advising on active, ethically problematic cases. So now there are a lot more people who describe themselves as bioethicists. Some people describe themselves as bioethics consultants who do other things. I mean, I occasionally work as an expert witness. I'm consulting with lawyers, consulting with judges, okay? But that's not what I have in mind here, okay? There are people who work in corporations. That's not what we have in mind. There are people who serve on ethics committees doing postmortems, okay, on ethically problematic cases. That's not what we have in mind. Okay? Now, these people possess expertise that presumably, okay, and that's going to be a really loaded expression here, okay, qualifies them to provide advice to clinicians. Okay? If you're going to hold yourself out as a bioethicist, as a clinical ethics consultant, okay, then you damn well better know something, okay, about ethics, okay. I think that probably goes without saying. This is a new social role. It didn't exist, I think, 30 or 40 years ago. Strangers at the bedside, okay. It's still largely indeterminate, and that's part of the problem that we're going to be looking at, okay, but with a potentially important social function. Okay, so you got to kind of think that, you know, that, as I do, that maybe it's a good thing to have people with that sort of expertise available to clinical staff in a hospital. Okay? Let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's now look at 1986. Okay? So now we're back to the Society for Bioethics Consultation. Okay? It's in bloom here, okay? And this, in my opinion, is an embryonic professional association. Okay? They had some kind of gatekeeping function, as David has pointed out. Okay, you have to have the signatures of 2 members of the organization in order to get in. It's not much of a gatekeeping function, okay, but it's not nothing either. Okay, they, I think, are genuinely interested, okay, in moving the field of ethics, of clinical ethics consultation towards some kind of determinate role, okay, and in they're not alone. Okay, this is really a kind of a great moment, I think. So those of you that knew Benjamin Friedman, okay, a Canadian bioethicist, he died a few years ago. I think the article was called "Carrying Codes to Newcastle." Okay, it was about the need of bioethicists for some kind of code. This is in 1986. He called for a code of ethics for clinical ethicists. And his definition is I think, really good: a shared and public understanding of the moral dimensions of its practice. So I think this is a kind of a nice way of looking at it. He saw that if we're going to take on this responsibility, we ought to have a sense of the standards that we should adhere to, the standards that are arguably built into the very role, okay, of clinical ethics consultants. Okay, and then, Okay, 1996, 10 years afterwards, okay, SHHV, which is the Society for Health and Human Values, and SBC, the Society for Bioethics Consultation, decide to collaborate on something they are calling the Task Force on Standards for Bioethics Consultation. A really interesting project, okay, that could have done a lot, okay, to advance the whole field towards some degree of professionalization, at least insofar as those first 2 criteria are concerned, okay, the claim to maximal competence, okay, and the commitment to significant social values. However, in 1996, okay, SBC, the Society for Bioethics Consultation, and the Society for Health and Human Values, and the American Association of Bioethics, okay, merge into the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities. Okay, and what happened, I think, is that since then, the field of bioethics consultation had been, to some extent, submerged. Okay, and I need to say something right now about the different kinds of organizations. Okay, professional associations, organizations of specialists, okay, fall into a number of different categories. Okay, the ones we're talking about right now are professional associations, and these are organizations that exist to serve the profession. Okay, like the American Bar Association and the American Medical Association are really good examples. Okay, although but there's another kind of organization called a trade association, and a trade association, unlike a professional association, exists to serve the economic interests of its members, like OPEC, okay, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, is clearly a trade association. And one problem that the American Bar Association has really struggled with over the years is that it really appreciates that it is both a professional association and a trade association, advancing the interests of doctors. And the American Medical Association has the same kind of potential conflict of interest. So they are, when they trundle down to the Congress, okay, they are sometimes there to serve professional interests, sometimes there to serve the economic interests of their membership. Okay? Sometimes it may not be really clear which one they're doing. Okay? But those are two, I think, ideal types of organization. Okay? Third type of organization in this context is a learned society. And the academic disciplines typically have learned societies. The American Philosophical Association exists to provide a venue where philosophers can argue and fight with each other. Okay? And one of the things that learned societies have done over the years is they've learned that they do not want to vote on take stands on public issues. I remember during the Vietnam War, philosophers repeatedly tried to get the American Philosophical Association to condemn the war in Vietnam. And there was a great deal of resistance to this. And I think that on balance, the American Philosophical Association was right to be reluctant to do this. And the reason is every time you advance one of these stands, okay, you're going to drive away maybe 10 to 30% of your membership, the minority that's been overruled. They're not going to be able to think of that organization as serving their interests. And if you keep on doing this, you're going to be left with not much of an organization, okay? And it's not going to be able to develop the kind of, debate, multivariate debate that you really would like to see. Okay? So learned societies, for the most part, do not like to make public stands on public issues, just because it diminishes their ability to bring varied points of view together into the same room. We okay about that? ASBH, two of the three organizations that constituted ASBH were learned societies. Okay? And when ASBH draws up its bylaws, it prohibits taking stands on any kind of issue. Okay? And so when those of us who are kind of refugees from the Society for Bioethics Consultation want to protest, for example, when a bioethicist is fired by the Medical University of South Carolina for having testified, we run up against a brick wall because you can't do this. Okay? So fundamentally, the task of developing a code of ethics is pretty much stymied, okay, as a consequence of that bylaw. Now, remember I pointed out earlier that there was a task force on standards for bioethics consultation. Okay, as ASBH gradually emerged, okay, that became the core competencies for bioethics consultation, okay, which is a much more modest document listing the kinds of knowledge areas that you need to have under your belt if you're going to take on bioethics, okay? Take on the task of a, let's see, so you have this learned society, and within the learned society are a bunch of practitioners, okay, that are stymied in the ability to actually form an embryonic professional association. We okay about that? Because of this. So in 2002, they lift the ban. Okay, so now let's look at the field of clinical ethics consultation as potentially an embryonic profession. Okay, first, the claim to maximal competency. Well, the first question you have to ask is, okay, if we have competency, competency at what? Lawyers are good at advocacy, are good at giving legal counsel. Okay, what is it that we do? Okay, what is it that actually that's our bread and butter? Okay, and here I want to suggest. Again, go to a prior question. What are the distinctive tasks of the clinical ethics consultation, the consultant? Okay, what are the things that we can do? And so here are three suggestions. And if anybody wants to add to this, I would be delighted to hear it. But I think these may be exhaustive, depending on how the presenting problem is conceived. Okay, so you're in a hospital, and something happens, okay, and you're called upon to do something, okay, not clear exactly what it is. Okay, so how do you conceive the problem? Here's the first type of problem. Okay. Problem here is someone doesn't know what to do. Okay, okay, and so here your task is to offer clear and well-grounded recommendations regarding active ethical problems in clinical practice, elaborating on alternative views, and the reasons for professional consensus if it exists. Okay. And this is a whole, I mean, I'm really very comfortable with this. This is a good deal of what I've tried to do myself over the years. What do I need in order to do this? I need really good subject matter knowledge, and I need teaching skills. Okay, and if my subject matter knowledge is good and my teaching skills are good, then I'm going to be able to have a conversation with whoever it is that doesn't know what to do, okay, and bring it about, okay, that they have I'm an information broker, really, a knowledge broker, and I'm going to be putting them in touch with the literature and with the conversations that occur in the field, okay, and let them know what the conventional wisdom is and why the conventional wisdom is the conventional wisdom and why it's okay. Or if it's not okay, I'll list those problems with it also. Okay. I'm a classic consultant. We okay with this? So this is the first thing that you can have. And this second one is, I think, a little newer. Okay. Nancy Dubler. Okay. But here I'm going to conceive the problem in a somewhat different way. It's not that somebody doesn't know what to do. It's that parties of some sort are in disagreement. Okay. There's a fight that is broken out, okay, within the staff. Okay. And my job is to is to put out the fire. Okay? I want to facilitate a conversation in which the parties to the dispute can arrive at consensus. So here the skills I need are going to be mediational skills. Okay? I'm going to have to learn how to facilitate, okay, agreement, okay, when people are ready to rip each other's throats out. Okay? And so here my client is not a single person who doesn't know what to do. Okay? It's rather a small social trouble. Okay? The Hawaiians have a great word, pilikia, okay, which means, trouble. Okay, some difficulty that people have found themselves in. And here's the third. And here, it's that the staff as a whole are just not on the same page. So here I'm looking not at two people that are in disagreement, okay, but a whole institution that just doesn't seem to have a shared sense of what it's about. Okay, I think this is probably pretty common, okay, within many institutions. Okay, and so what I need to do here is to bring those working within the organizational setting into alignment with a common set of responsible values. John Galensky, who ran a bioethics consultation group out of Oakland, California, talked about building a moral community. Okay, and I don't mean, being an evangelist here, okay, but I mean just, ensuring that individuals are all clear about what the institution as a whole is endeavoring to do. Okay, and so here what is required, I think, is skill in effecting change in organizational culture. And it's really a much bigger task. Okay, I need to know something about how to affect change in an organizational culture, and that's not at all easy. Okay? So what we have here are three different tasks. They occur at three different levels. They also require, I think, different competencies and different knowledge sets, each one of them. Okay? So now let's go back to the claim to maximal competence. Okay, what is it that bioethicists, okay, are supposed to be maximally competent in? Okay? I think we're far from anything like this. We're not clear about the skill sets and the knowledge bases that we ought to be developing. A revision of the first ASBH core competencies document is in preparation. I'm actually on the committee that's developing that, sketching the elements of an education. Okay, this is what we might be able to get, okay, that might prepare one for work as a clinical ethics consultant. That was one of the hopes of this core competencies document, okay, as it evolved from the earlier SBC document. Okay, so if I'm a master's program, let's see, I might want to look at the core competencies document in order to develop the curriculum that I want master students to go through. Okay? No plans to certify individuals who have achieved some determinate level of mastery, so there's really no gatekeeping function at all, okay, among people who describe themselves as bioethicists. No plans to accredit training programs, so there's no effort basically to ensure which master's and doctoral level programs are acceptable and which ones just aren't doing their job. Okay, now, and on the good side, I think that there are some apparently decent master's or doctoral level programs in clinical ethics consultation. Okay, but I'm not in a position to pronounce upon which ones those are. Okay, it would require, I think, a much more determinate effort to assess individual programs. But you can't do that, as I hope I've indicated, unless you're real clear about what tasks a bioethics consultant ought to be doing in the hospital, and what skills and what knowledges this individual ought to possess under his or her belt. So barely started. Now here's one good thing, I think. There's been progress. This is the second area, commitment to significant social values. There's been progress towards identification of ethical issues faced by clinical ethicists in their clinical work. And we ran a questionnaire we had about 400 or 500 people, members of ASBH, asking them, have you ever encountered an ethical problem in your professional work, and what is it? And we got a kind of a nice view as to where clinical ethics consultants need help. Here's a really good case. The chief executive of a hospital or a high-ranking administrator calls the ethicist into his office and says, look, the nurses or whatever want to unionize. We don't want this to happen. I would like to have arguments from you why unionization is unprofessional and a bad thing. Now, you see, you're not able to say, I won't do this, unless you have a really clear idea of what your role is. And to the extent that the role is indeterminate, all you can I don't really feel comfortable doing that sort of thing. You can't say, we don't do that, which is what lawyers can do and what doctors can do. That you're going from the I don't feel comfortable with this to something much, much more powerful. We don't do this. This is not part of the job. Until the job is defined and fleshed out, individuals are kind of in deep kimchi, as we say in Hawaii, if they don't have the ability to answer that question. Conflicting duties as a compliance officer. So some bioethicists work in institutions, and partly they give nice advice to people who are troubled, and partly they serve as a compliance officer, ensuring that individuals measure up to appropriate regulatory standards. Well, okay, so you're having a confidential discussion with somebody, and what they tell you is that they are violating regulations. So what are you supposed to do? Do you keep the confession in confidence, as a consultant is supposed to do, an advisor? Or do you put on your regulatory compliance hat, and report you to the administrator? What you're subject to there is what I call conflict of obligation. You're occupying two social roles, and many hospitals have filled the position of a clinical ethicist with somebody who does something else in the hospital, and there are many possibilities for that kind of ethical conflict. So basically what you have to do is you have to be alert to the possibility of those things happening, and unfortunately, many people aren't. It's not part of the training we provide. Third, conflicts of interest. Carl Elliott, and how can I put it, has been complained about a field that is supposed to be consisting of watchdogs has turned into a field of lapdogs. We're basically beholden to the very people we should be blowing the whistle against. And then lastly, information management. That is, so I'm on an ethics committee, or I do work on a particular case. Is it okay for me to write it up? Appropriately redacted. Can I use it in my classes? If I'm really stymied by a particular case, can I call up an expert in another state, and seek assistance from him? And all of these issues have actually come up, with respect to what is appropriate in preserving confidentiality and what is absolutely not appropriate. And clinical ethics consultants have lost their jobs, in fact, because of a lack of clarity about this. And I don't know. So I write an article, which I've done many times. Am I supposed to get the hospital to sign off on it? Am I supposed to get the patient to sign off on it, when the facts have been heavily redacted? I think the field itself ought to have something to say about this, but you will look hard and wide to find any authoritative ethical standards on how this should be set up. So that's the kind of thing, it seems to me, that the field itself needs to pronounce upon. Little progress in providing authoritative guidance. and huge amounts of criticism on the failure to self-regulate, failure to deliver on the requirements of professionalization. Though so many of you have seen the article by Giles Schofield in the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics, and Carl Elliott, okay, has been a persistent critic of the field of bioethics. Okay? No clarity. I've worked with nurses, medical students, doctors, preschool teachers, and you put small groups together and say, okay, what should the good preschool teacher, nurse, doctor care about? Okay, and they'll come up with lists very, very quickly. Okay, and they're good lists, and there's an enormous amount of reliability in their answers to that question. So it doesn't matter whether I'm talking to preschool teachers in California or New York, the lists that are going to come up are exactly identical. Okay? There are a few things I could say more about how this procedure actually works, okay, but it's pretty reliable. We've done it just once, okay, and this was a year ago. Put bioethicists together and said, okay, what should the good bioethicists care about? They were just not able to grapple with that question. It's like it didn't compute, okay? And it seems to me that's I think really disturbing. It shows that we have a way to go, okay, before we have clarity on the social values to be taken into account.
And what do you mean by bioethics?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. Oops, we're going in the wrong direction. Okay. Exclusive social reliance. This cannot occur until the gatekeeping function is operative, which it's clearly not. Okay. Right now, anyone, and this is a real big problem, can identify as a clinical ethics consultant. Okay. I went to a 2-day seminar last weekend, and look, they gave me this little piece of paper that says what I am now. I mean, that's not a fairy tale, okay? And Giles Schofield, among others, has said this is a disaster waiting to happen. Okay, there are people who just do not know what they're doing. Okay, and now this may be a good thing. In 2 weeks at the ASBH meeting, the end of this month, several dozen clinical ethics consultation will meet in Cleveland for an organizational meeting of a clinical ethics consultation affinity group. Okay, and this will essentially be the first such organizational gathering in the United States. Possibly there was an international group that met in the United States a while back, okay, since the dissolution of SBC. Okay, so there's an out-of-the-way possibility that maybe we'll be looking at the nidus, okay, of a professional association for clinical ethics consultation. In addition to the 300 clinical ethics consultants who belong to ASBH, okay, and that's the result of our survey, there are hundreds of others. I mean, there are lots of hospitals in the United States where people are serving as clinical ethics consultation that don't belong to ASBH, that have maybe attended 1 or 2 small sessions, or maybe they have master's degrees, okay, but aren't functioning very well. And these people might well be attracted to an organization that's doing this. If the quality of clinical care has an ethical dimension, all right, then the quality of clinical ethics consultants needs to be assured, and right now it's not. Okay, so I'm thinking that if I'm right about this, then it's not just clinical ethics consultants that have some kind of interest in seeing to it that professionalization is a process that's going on, but also hospitals that depend upon clinical ethicists are also going to be have a strong interest in seeing to it that this is attended to. So hospitals have something to gain from the professionalization. Okay? And here's the choreography, real quickly, what I think might conceivably happen. Okay? I'm not making any statements about who's going to do this, okay? But this is fundamentally what has to happen in order for the process of professionalization to move along. First of all, work towards clarity on the tasks of clinical ethics consultants. I've given 3 options, and I think that that's not really a part of the literature right now. Specify the knowledges and skills needed to complete the tasks. And so those tasks actually give you some insight as to what's needed. Develop standards for institutions that train clinical ethics consultants, and that comes out of the second one. Once you're clear about what it is you need to be able to do and need to know, okay, then it's possible to design programs that will bring it about that people have those abilities and master that knowledge. Catalog the professional dilemmas of clinical ethics consultants, and this is basically what we did in nursing. We got hundreds of cases and then worked them out, and then ran workshops on them and developed the code out of the membership actually developed the code. and then work towards consensus on core values. Okay, again, this is classic reflective equilibrium. The cases are going to require you to, alter that. What should responsible clinical ethics consultants care about? Okay. And here are the hallmarks. I think this is, what you get by this little exercise, okay, is what I call subjective celebratability. Okay. That is, what we did was we had small groups working. Anybody could nominate a core value for the list, but it wouldn't get on the official group list unless everybody could drink to it with enthusiasm. Okay. Okay. And that kind of like eliminated all the outliers. Okay. And so subjective celebratability, if I'm a doctor, okay, I want to drink to our patients doing better as a consequence, okay, of our administrations. Okay? Okay? If I really like it better if my patient withers and dies, then maybe I've made an error in career choice. Okay? Okay? Then the second one is curricular incorporation. Okay? If you're genuinely serious, okay, about this core value, then it ought to be incorporated into the educational curriculum in a way that will equip people to realize that value of whatever it is. This is my problem, by the way, with justice, I have to say, okay, which appears in the Beecham-Childress list. Okay? If justice were genuinely a core value, they would have courses in justice, okay, in medical school, but of course they don't. Okay. Now, there are two minor areas. One is non-discrimination, and the other is allocation of scarce resources in triage, okay, which have elements of justice in them. Okay. But as a general topic, it's not something that you focus on within medical school. So okay. Then lastly, social endorsement, and in a way this is the most important. Okay. These values can't just be things that doctors care about. They have to be values that the rest of us want our doctors to care about, reasonably. We okay about that? Okay. And that's what creates the possibility of a social contract, okay, okay, between the profession and the community it serves. Okay. So if you manage to satisfy all three of these, then you've got a collection of core values. Now, this is basically the desiderata, the hallmarks, okay, of an acceptable set of core values. Only when the values are clear can we ask how should they be respected in the circumstances of the reported cases. And when you can answer this question, you're really well on your way to having a code of ethics. Okay, what do you need for the code? The code has to be consistent with itself. This is my big problem with the AMAs, and judicial opinions, that they're written in different decades, okay? And it's easy to find major contradictions within them because the people that are writing it now don't know anything about what was written, 10 years ago. So when I was at the AMA, this was my big argument. You needed to have somebody go through it and eliminate all the inconsistencies. Like, for example, the legal profession did with its restatement of the law of contracts back in the 20s. Okay? Justifiability. So the principles need to somehow stand on some kind of justification. Okay? They can't just be, we're Samoan, this is what we do. Okay? What is it? I'm a panda. I just lost everything here. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm almost done. Okay, what do we get to here? I'm sorry. Justifiability, yeah, comprehensiveness. The code provides clear, usable, authoritative guidance for the most common and serious ethical dilemmas of professional practice. Here's why having a catalog of cases is really helpful. Because after you've got the case, the code, you can go back and make sure you're providing appropriate advice on all of the problems that were submitted. This is what we did with the NAEYC code, the code for preschool teachers. And what happened was, we didn't catch all the cases. There were new problems that arose, and they required revisions of the code, I think at about the 5-year mark and again at about the 8-year mark. Okay, so there have been 2 revisions since 1988, okay, of that code, brought about precisely by that. Okay? Ownership. This is really the most important thing. Okay? The American Association of University Professors, AAUP, has a statement of ethics that it drafted, I think, back in 1968. Okay? Almost no professors have heard about it. Okay? It sits in the back of some drawer, okay, for professors if they have it at all. Okay? It's pathetic. Okay, I'm ashamed of it, okay, my field. Okay, actually it's done it. And so that's an example of having a code that is in fact not seen, okay, by the individuals as defining, in a sense, the ethical dimension of their professional practice. So how you draft the code is, in my opinion, at least as important as what the code says. And so it's got to be done in a way that's transparent and as participatory as possible. Okay? Exclusive social reliance, this is the last step. And this is not done by the profession, it's done by the society as a whole as a consequence of how well you've discharged the first two steps. Not until the profession of clinical ethics consultation is worthy of it. Okay, you got to be reliably competent, reliably committed to respecting pertinent social values. Okay, we have a long way to go. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions. Ken, if you could, when questions are articulated, if you could restate them, because they're recorded on that microphone.
Gotcha.
You won't pick up on them.
Okay. But anybody who wants the slides can write to me, and I'd be really happy to shoot you a set of the slides.
Questions, please.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As this process rolls out,
Yeah.
do you, is there pressure from outside in to shape what ethicists are supposed to do or represent?
Not right now. Yeah. Okay. The question is, are there external pressures on the field of bioethics to shape the code in particular ways? Now, I'm just looking at the way the process has gone on within ASBH. It's real clear that it would have to go well beyond ASBH. There are plenty of people that are not members of ASBH that really should be a part of that process. One of the things that worries me a little bit, is that there's some sectarian bioethicists that may be very much against what the code actually looks like. And so I haven't seen any of that yet, but to the extent that this really develops into a process, we may see opposition of that sort. There are a lot of people within any field that don't want anybody telling them what to do, including my own damn colleagues. Okay? And those people are just not going to be happy with any group laying down appropriate standards. Okay. And so I suspect that at least those two sources of opposition may become manifest if this process actually picks up and goes along. Again, I don't know whether it will. Yes, Ozzy, yeah.
What do you do with those kinds of oppositions, which I predict will emerge? What happens if you take a majority vote and they get outvoted? What happens with those?
Yeah.
About the politicization of the whole process.
Yeah. Ozzy's question is, what do you do if there is substantial political opposition? Okay, I don't know if this is going to work, Ozzy. Okay? I don't know if people want it. I don't know if people. It's a pretty complicated thing to even conceive in the first place, and so people are going to have to understand the way in which this process. Remember I talked about how professionalization is, for the individual, involves the assumption of a new identity. And it's an identity with substantial, with implicit normative dimensions. So being a lawyer requires you to accept certain kinds of principles. I think that it's an open question, whether this is doable. And so I expect that it will not come without opposition. I'm not going to tell anybody how to deal with that opposition until it manifests itself. Yeah, Dave.
One of the largest challenges as to the social acceptability or desirability of a new profession, only in that you and I go to a doctor, or you and I may seek the services of an attorney. But unless you've had one of these catastrophic family cases personally, you're not even going to know what a clinical ethics consultant is.
That's correct.
And I would wager if you had the money that NIH would never go ahead and give for such a survey, and then just ask the general public, so what do you think about clinical ethics consultation? What do you think about these people doing this work in the hospital? What do you think about the roles that they do? We have a lot of, I don't know.
That's
they would have absolutely no clue.
That's right.
So even if you get through step number 1 and step number 2, you're going to get to the, I don't know, at the last part of it. So you can come in saying, I'm the new sheriff in town. I've got this brand new profession. But if society doesn't even know that or recognize what its function is, you can't have a covenant with society if society doesn't know who you are.
Right.
You have an invisible profession. You have an uncloaked profession.
Yeah. So I mean, the point here is that that society as a whole is not aware of what individuals occupying the social role do or what their competence is. You saw the hat that I wore over the summer. There was a bright yellow hat with ethicist written on the front of the hat. Okay? And I've taken to wearing it. Okay?
In the hospital?
Well, not in the hospital. But in other places, and people do come up to me and they want to know what it is. Okay, and are you the guys that get demons out of people? That's one of them. Okay. And it's interesting to respond to it. But my dream is that how you can wake up one morning and know that you need to see a dentist, or you can open up your mail and know that you need to see a lawyer. Okay. Well, I'm waiting for people to wake up and know they need to talk to an ethicist. That's my dream. Okay, and we're a long way from that. Yes.
One of the factors in the professions that I did not see mentioned was that regulation of its own.
Yeah.
Physicians presumably govern their own. It is physicians that decide that other physicians are not competent, so they should not be licensed or should lose it. And it occurs to me that may be one of the major barriers to establishing anything like a professional association for ethical consults. That would really be a sticky point as to how you regulate it.
Yeah.
How you decide, you can't stay, even if you were.
Yeah. Well, enforcement is extremely dicey, and the American Medical Association doesn't really have any enforcement powers over people that violate the code. And the American Bar Association, well, lawyers are involved in the process. Typically, the judiciary of the state is going to be involved in the disbarment process. I think that it's an issue that pops up way down the line in this whole process. For example, there's no enforcement provision in the NAEYC. But here's one place where it pops up. Okay, so I'm not doing something, or I'm doing something. Okay, my employer, I'm an employed professional, tells me, do this. Okay, and what this is in violation of my code. Okay, I adhere to my code and say, I'm sorry, you don't have, as we talked about earlier, you don't have the right to tell me what to do. This is not something we do. And so I'm fired. Okay. Now, there are examples in many professions of individuals who are fired for refusing to violate a provision of their code. In some states, but not all. Okay. There are actions called wrongful discharge. Okay. You can't fire me, for a list of reasons, but one standard, it's actually a New Jersey case, Pierce versus Ortho Pharmaceutical Corporation, okay, where it's actually a doctor who refuses to do something. And in the case, there's the principle that if somebody is fired for having refused to violate a principle, a provision of a code of ethics, which provision is conceived in the public interest, they will have a cause of action against the employer in wrongful discharge. Now, that to me is an extraordinarily powerful tool, that having a code of ethics gives you. What it means is the people that are employing you are going to be limited in what they can do. Just as an academician has academic freedom, I can't be fired for doing my job. So a bioethicist, to the extent that the job is actually spelled out carefully enough, will have a degree of protection, and I think that may assist tremendously. Yeah.
I'm going back a little ways to what it takes to become a certified bioethicist.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm noting in ASBH is a paucity in attention to psychiatric ethics, which is an area that I'm working in, philosophy and psychiatry. And so one of the things that I see philosophers doing in the more general medical field is some of them getting some actual training in clinical ethics, so that we're not just specialized in ethical theory, but that we actually know what the problems in the clinic are. something that those of us here have talked about quite a bit. But in psychiatry, philosophers do not get involved, do not infiltrate the field. And so the psychiatrists don't know what the ethical issues are that they don't already notice. And the philosophers who want to talk about psychiatric ethics don't have experience of the psychiatric clinics, and so don't really know. So one of the things that it seems really important, and I'm just taking this particular point, is attention to the kind of training that those who want to be experts in ethics have to have in the clinic. And for that to happen, we have to have major institutional changes so that psychiatry in all of its areas will welcome somebody from a so-called outside field to be a participant there. And I am doing that, but I know very, very few philosophers who are doing that right now. And until then, you can't get a dialogue going in areas like ASBH about clinical ethics consultants, about what the issues are in that joint field. If people aren't doing it together.
The question here involves the need for ethicists basically to get access to healthcare delivery systems, in order to, do their residencies in a sense. I mean, just as a personal matter, I started teaching medical ethics around 73 or so, 72, and I realized around 78 or so that I shouldn't be doing this, having not set foot in a hospital since I had my tonsils out as a small kid. So I was in Chicago at the time, and I began contacting hospitals in the Chicago area, asking, is it okay for me to kind of loiter in the hall as a PhD in philosophy? And one after another turned me down. It was just absolutely impossible to do anything like that. And that was one of the reasons why I went to Hawaii. I thought there would be more aloha in Hawaii than there was in Chicago. And that turned out to be correct. But you're certainly right. I don't think that, and this is a major problem, I think, with philosophers who go directly from the seminar room into a hospital ethics committee. They're dangerous. They're really dangerous people, because they don't have any idea of what the clinical setting is all about. And when I was involved in the American Philosophical Association Committee on Philosophy and Medicine, I was trying to do something about that, but I don't think the impetus can come from the API. It's got to really emerge from programs that are willing to assist people with appropriate expertise in ethics, in getting things under the belt. And I guess there's some postdoctoral programs here and there that kind of do that, and that would be a great thing. But we got a long way to go.
Psychiatrists without the ethical insights of philosophers can also be dangerous.
That's probably, there's those two big collections. Block was one of the, Chodov and Block on ethical issues in psychiatry. I remember going through both of those, and I don't think there's a single philosopher in either one of those two collections on psychiatric ethics. Yes?
I'm bothered by your words standards and codes. Because with the topic, clinical ethicists, I think about, clinicians and patients and families and the context of hospitals and organizations, but then you bring in the word social values, so we're up to another systems level of society or community, and it just seems to me that from a systems perspective, we have the name, that involves individual clinician-patient responsibilities, and yet you're invoking a hierarchy, of systems, and then you want to standardize and codify. And I just don't understand how that's possible, or whether it's a good thing to even consider. An ethical thing to consider.
And this is a really good point. That is, if we're talking about an Uber code, that's going to govern the work of bioethicists generally, then doesn't that remove the possibility of what spontaneity and serendipity and judgment applicable to individual circumstances in a very dangerous way? And then your question, I think, it's probably my fault. There's a distinction that needs to be made. Between the principles, etc., that bioethicists appeal to when they're looking at somebody, a clinician that doesn't know what to do, two clinicians that are arguing with each other about what to do, and a whole institution that lacks clarity about what to do. Okay? That remains pretty much as it is. Okay? And I don't have anything to say about how that work should be done. Okay? The part that interests me is when the bioethicist, the clinical ethics consulting, himself or herself has an ethical problem arising out of the work. So when the chief executive officer asks for my advice on developing a speech that will explain why unionization is an immoral thing, that's not an ethical problem having to do with the clinical setting, although it sort of is indirectly. It has to do with what my job is in relationship to him. So the ethical problems that we're looking at are not problems that arise in clinical practice. They are problems that arise for clinical ethics consultants, doing their job in clinical practice. Okay? So that's what the code is going to appeal to. It's still going to leave the content of the bioethicist's work untouched. Okay? It's just that I'm going to have a clearer idea of who my stakeholders are. Okay? I mean, this is the way codes can be formulated. If I'm a professor, if I'm a preschool teacher, okay, I owe something to the kid, I owe something to the family, I owe something to my co-workers, I owe something to the community in a sense, and I owe something to allied professionals, psychologists, for example, social workers, and so on. And so the code tries to organize all of those obligations. Okay? It leaves the knowledge base and the skills of the preschool teacher alone. Okay? It just tells me how to understand how my obligations work in all of these cases. You okay about that?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay.
Consider that.
Yeah, it's not the whole story, but I think it's about 80% of it. Okay.
I'm not convinced that the social acceptance occurs in the way that you phrased it.
Yeah.
Society basically takes the profession and looks at it and goes yay or nay.
Yeah.
Consider doctors as an example. The AMA basically became the AMA, and there were no competitors because they crushed all of their competitors. They said, we can do this, midwives cannot work, chiropractors are quacks, et cetera. It was from the institution. Yeah. Which then relates to David's concern that it's never going to happen that society is going to say, we ask you ethicists to work this way. But it doesn't follow that maybe ethicists can't work from the outside, maybe not by crushing all competition, but nonetheless to provide social acceptance from the inside out rather than the outside in.
Right. Well, I mean, there are all kinds of horror stories that can emerge. I mean, the issue here is that that professional organizations can do evil as well as good. Okay, they can crush the opposition I mean, for example, the legal profession a while ago did its best to kill night schools. Okay, and it was kind of a racist program. I mean, they didn't want people to become lawyers that had too many vowels in their last name and so on. Okay, and so there's a good book on this. I'm not remembering what the title of it was, but that you can carry on this task in a way that is not legitimate, or that that involves wrongdoing, doesn't mean you can't do it in a way that's legitimate.
It's not so much that it's possible for wrongdoing. It's that it's possible to obtain social acceptance, social acceptance of a monopoly from the institution and from the profession itself, rather than from society observing from the outside and saying, okay, we accept you. And again, it can be done in good and bad ways.
Okay.
No question about that.
Okay. Well, let me give you another clarification. Okay. I am not convinced that a monopoly is going to be a good thing for bioethicists. It may well not be. Okay. But I am convinced that trying to be clear about what knowledge and skills bioethics consultants need to have under their belt, and what ethical commitments ought to be implicit in the social role are good things to accomplish, irrespective of whether you actually achieve some kind of social endorsement.
Okay. That's educational.
Pardon me?
That's educational.
And it could also be certification. You can do a certification without necessarily having a monopoly. So I will be a certified clinical ethics consultant, okay, receiving a little, pin from some embryonic professional association without enjoying anything like a monopoly.
But if you're trying to establish a framework or a kind of acceptability at the social level, without the framework of professionalism, it seems to me that is an educational role, not an enforcement or necessarily even a professional.
That's right. You may not need enforcement if your educational system is really good enough. Yes.
Let me rephrase Stephen's question in a sort of epistemological vein instead of a moral vein. You've given us a pretty idealized normative view of how different professions should get sort of socially accredited. But there's a lot of writing that sort of looks at professionalization not in a moral normative way, but in terms of sort of existing power relations in society. So it seems like it's kind of an open question whether whether this kind of idealized justification really can be done, or there's a kind of inescapable surd that just involves, power relations and elbowing, and the AMA because of various factors just beating out the chiropractors, whereas really they were giving equal care at the time. And so, and you have the same kind of thing in a lot of the sort of trade organizations in labor.
Right.
So, I think that's something that sort of springs to mind in hearing your pretty idealized version of what should be the case.
The point here basically is that professional organizations, like lots of other organizations, can be corrupted, can be dominated by self-interest. That can be.
Yeah, but that's not what I mean. I mean, sure that can happen, but there can be lots of cases where you don't even know that you need what I have to give you.
Yes, right.
And so it's really a good selling job on my part, and I'm not cheating you. I'm just, you didn't know you needed something rather. Like, it appears that a lot of people who have a stake in healthcare don't know they need ethics experts.
Right.
That think they're doing just fine as it is.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy, and it may not even be possible.
Right, but it might not come about that they're ethics experts just because everybody sits down and is convinced.
That's right. That's right. So I can't say you're wrong.
What a fine way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.